For 12 years, everyone called her a washed-out pilot who couldn't hack it. Nobody knew the truth. She was the best Top Gun instructor the Air Force ever buried. Then an F-22 spiraled out of control above her, and the boy inside it was flying on borrowed time, and her buried past. Before we get into how we got here, comment where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. An hour before any of it started, Harper Vance was just another woman standing too far back from the fence, and the crowd around her had already decided what that meant. "Hey," a vendor called out, grinning at her like he'd already won something. "This ain't a yoga retreat." A ripple of laughter followed, small and ugly and quick. Harper didn't answer. Answering gave people something to hold on to. Silence, they forgot fast. She kept her eyes on the sky, because up there none of it mattered, not the sunburned vendor, not the woman in the sundress who told her, a few minutes later, that she looked more suited to something gentler, honey. Gardening, maybe, while her friends laughed on cue. "Gardening's honest work," Harper said, quiet and even, and turned back to the horizon before the woman could answer. 12 years of practice, and it still cost her something every time. A small piece she didn't have an infinite supply of. A little girl tugged her father's sleeve nearby. "Daddy, why is she standing there all alone? She doesn't even look like she likes planes." "Probably lost," the father said, already looking away. "Doesn't know what's going on." If only he knew. She could read the wind sheer off the coast, could feel which pilot up there was overcorrecting on his roll before the announcer had even finished the introduction. Her body remembered even when her life didn't. That was the whole cruelty of it, 12 years of trying to become someone who didn't know these things anymore, and the knowledge had simply waited her out. An older woman in a wide-brimmed hat, sitting in a folding beach chair with a paperback she wasn't reading, caught Harper's eye and offered an easy smile that asked for nothing. "You've got the look of somebody who used to be part of something bigger than watching it from the ground," she said. "Not a question. Just an observation," offered gently, the way you'd hand someone something fragile. "I used to be a lot of things," Harper said, and left it there. The woman nodded like she understood exactly how much a sentence like that was allowed to hold, and went back to pretending to read. It was the only kindness Harper let herself receive that afternoon without flinching. A group of young men in mirrored sunglasses drifted closer to the fence, tossing empty soda cans into a pile. "Yo," one of them said, nudging his friend, loud enough to carry. "What's she staring at? Bet she doesn't even know what an F-22 is." Harper gave them nothing. Just watched the jet climb, watched the nose lift a fraction too sharp, watched her own pulse answer a full second before her mind caught up. Something's wrong with that pitch. An older man in a faded navy cap stood a few feet down the fence line, and even with his back half turned she caught the shape of his attention shift, the particular stillness of someone who has spent a career learning to notice when a body doesn't match the story it's telling. He didn't say anything. Not yet. The first sound was wrong before anyone in the crowd understood why. A high metallic cough, then a stutter, then black smoke unrolling from the F-22's left engine like a flag nobody wanted to salute. 12,000 feet above the Carolina coast, the jet that had been carving clean white arcs across a blue afternoon suddenly wasn't flying anymore. It was falling with the engine still running. "Mayday, mayday, I've lost the left engine. I can't hold altitude." The pilot's voice cracked out of the loudspeakers, young and thin with fear, and 3,000 people on the ground went still at once. Harper Vance was standing at the back fence, exactly where she stood every year, hands buried in the pocket of a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big. She didn't run toward the noise like everyone else. She didn't run at all. She simply lifted her face to the sky the way a person turns toward a voice they'd know anywhere, even after 12 years of trying not to. Overcorrecting on the roll, she thought, before she could stop herself. He's fighting the yaw instead of riding it. Old instinct. Worse than smoking, her therapist used to say, the one appointment she'd kept before deciding some things weren't meant to be healed, only carried. She still translated engine pitch into airspeed without meaning to. Still counted seconds between a stall warning and the point of no return. 12 years of yoga classes and sunrise runs on an empty beach hadn't touched that part of her. It just waited, patient, the way scar tissue waits under a bandage. Around her the air show dissolved into chaos. A mother yanked her son's face into her shoulder. A vendor abandoned his rack of T-shirts mid-sentence. Phones rose in a ragged wave, capturing a tragedy nobody there yet understood how to stop. From the control tower, a voice boomed over the emergency channel, raw with the particular panic of a man who has run out of good options. Is there anyone here rated to fly a Raptor? Anyone? Silence answered him. The kind of silence that has weight. Harper's hand closed around the keychain in her pocket, a small tin jet, wings chipped down to bare metal from 12 years of her thumb worrying the same spot. She had told herself for 12 years that this life was smaller and that smaller was safer. Small didn't ask questions. Small didn't get anyone killed. But somewhere above her, a boy barely out of flight school was fighting a dying aircraft alone, and his voice sounded exactly like hers had sounded once, a lifetime ago, the first time she understood a machine had stopped listening to her hands. She stepped over the barrier. Nobody stopped her. That was the strange part, 12 years of being invisible on purpose, and in the one moment she needed people to see her, they simply parted, confused, murmuring, too startled to do anything but watch a woman in a thrift store hoodie walk toward the control tower like she had every right in the world to be there. Colonel Grant Osborne was standing at the window when the door opened, watching the crippled jet lose altitude in real time, and when he turned to see who had entered, the color left his face like a tide going out. "Vance," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was closer to a confession. She didn't waste time on him. She set a worn leather case on the console between them and flipped it open. A badge, a little tarnished, still legible under the fluorescent lights, Captain Harper Vance. Call sign, Valkyrie. Top Gun instructor. "That's Ethan Cole's son up there," she said. "Open the hangar." Something in Osborne's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. Whatever he was, and Harper had a very clear 12-year-old opinion on that subject, he wasn't stupid enough to let a boy die on principle. He nodded once to the young captain beside him. "Get her a jet." The hangar smelled the way it always had, jet fuel and hot metal and something under that she could only call home, though she'd spent over a decade insisting she'd never use that word for this place again. A technician glanced at her civilian clothes and didn't bother hiding his doubt. "Ma'am, when's the last time you actually flew one of these?" "Long enough that I've had time to miss it," Harper said, climbing into the cockpit. "Not so long I forgot how." She strapped in. Her hands remembered the sequence before her mind caught up, a language she'd spent 12 years trying to unlearn, rushing back all at once like a door blown open by wind. The canopy sealed above her, and for one suspended second the noise of the hangar disappeared, replaced by the small, private silence she used to live inside for a living. Then the radio crackled. "I can't hold it. It's going down." "Listen to me," Harper said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Match my airspeed." "Exactly. I'll get you home." A pause. Then, shaky, "Yes, ma'am." She pushed the throttle forward, and gravity slammed her back into the seat, 12 years compressed into a single heartbeat of acceleration. For the first time in over a decade, Valkyrie went back into the sky. She found him at 9,000 feet, smoke pouring steady and thick from his left engine, the jet wallowing like something wounded and trying not to show it. "Talk to me," she said. "What's your name?" "Lieutenant Cole. Bennett Cole." Her stomach dropped clean through the floor of the cockpit. She filed the name away, there wasn't room for ghosts at 9,000 feet with a dying engine 10 feet off her wing, and kept her voice level. "Copy, Lieutenant. Give me your numbers." 9,200 feet. 210 knots and dropping. Fuel's at 30% and falling faster than it should. Faster than it should. Harper's mind assembled the pieces instantly. A fuel leak meant more than a flamed-out engine, it meant something structural, something she recognized in a way that made her hands go cold on the stick. She'd seen this exact signature before. Once. 12 years ago. In a jet that hadn't made it back. She pushed the memory down. There would be time for it later, if there was a later. "We bring you down slow," she said. "Match my airspeed. Not a knot faster." "Copy." A ragged breath. "Am I going to die up here?" The question landed harder than it should have, because she'd heard it asked before, in almost the same words, by a man she'd loved like family, in a cockpit not so different from this one. She hadn't been able to save him. "No," she said, fierce and certain. "Not on my watch." They talked their way down together, altitude bleeding off in careful, deliberate increments, wind gusting harder as they dropped toward the coastline. Somewhere in the middle of it, between an instruction about rudder input and a correction on his angle of bank, Bennett said something that stopped her breath entirely. "My dad used to say that." Exact same words. "You're doing good." "Your dad," Harper said carefully. "Ethan Cole." A pause, longer this time. "You knew him?" She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Long enough to feel 12 years land on her chest all at once. Then she opened them, because the sky doesn't wait for anyone's grief, not even hers. "I flew with him," she said. "Best wingman I ever had. They told us it was pilot error. His fault." "It wasn't," Harper said, and for the first time in 12 years she let the truth out into open air. "It wasn't him. And it wasn't me either, though I let people believe otherwise for longer than I should have." Bennett's voice cracked, disbelief and grief tangled together. "What do you mean, you?" "I was his wingman that day. I've spent 12 years being told to keep my mouth shut about what really happened. And I did, because I was scared, and because the people asking me to stay quiet made very sure I understood exactly how scared I should be." Silence stretched between them, filled only by 2 engines fighting gravity in unison. "He used to talk about you," Bennett said finally. "Not by name. Just, there was a pilot he flew with. Said if anything ever happened to him, she'd be the one person who'd tell me the truth eventually." Harper's eyes stung, sudden and fierce. "Then let's get you on the ground, Lieutenant. And I'll keep that promise." The left engine flamed out at 300 feet, exactly when she'd feared it might. "Rudder full right," Harper said, calm even as her pulse roared in her ears. "Compensate the yaw. Don't fight it, guide it. I'm losing altitude fast." "I know. I've got you." Below them the main runway was still 14 miles out, too far, at this rate, with an engine gone and a fuel line bleeding faster than the math wanted to allow. Harper's eyes caught the long gray ribbon of the coastal access road running parallel to the dunes. "We're not going to make the runway," she said. "There's a road. Straight enough, long enough. That's our backup." "You want me to land a fighter jet on a road?" "I want you to trust me. I've done harder things with worse odds." "Like what?" She hesitated only a beat. "Like standing at a fence for 12 years, watching other people fly, telling myself I'd never do this again. I was wrong. Turns out you don't actually forget how. You just forget you're allowed to." A shaky, disbelieving laugh crackled through the radio. "Copy that, Valkyrie." Below, cars scattered off the road as the 2 jets dropped toward it, a family shoving their kids toward the dune grass, an elderly man frozen with his cane until a stranger sprinted back to drag him clear with seconds to spare. Harper watched it happen in her peripheral vision and kept her voice locked steady, giving Bennett nothing but calm. 50 feet. Hold your nose up. Trust the aircraft, not your instincts. Copy. His voice had gone strangely quiet, the particular stillness that arrives right at the edge of terror, when there's nothing left to do but commit. 10 feet. Flare, now. The wounded jet's nose lifted at the last possible instant. Gears screamed against asphalt in a shower of sparks, the aircraft fishtailing, skidding, the dead engine finally giving out completely, and then, impossibly, it slowed, and stopped. Harper circled once, watching for fire, watching for any sign the disaster wasn't over. None came. "Bennett," she said, her own composure fraying at last. "You still with me?" A long pause. Then, disbelieving, "Alive, yeah. I'm here." Something that had been sealed in Harper's chest for 12 years finally cracked open. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like breathing again after a very long time spent holding her breath without realizing she'd ever stopped. Osborne was waiting when she landed, flanked by 2 security officers and an expression arranged into something that might have passed for concern if she hadn't known exactly what was underneath it. "That's quite a stunt, Captain," he said. "Unauthorized use of a military aircraft, ignoring a stand-down order. I'm going to need you to come with me." "You're arresting me." "Detaining you. Until we sort out what happened up there." "What happened," Harper said, "is I saved that boy's life in a jet with the same defect that killed his father." "You knew it was still in the fleet, didn't you?" Something flickered behind Osborne's eyes, there and gone, but she'd spent 12 years learning to read exactly that flicker. "Not here," he said, low, glancing at the officers. "You don't get to choose the terms anymore, Colonel. You lost that right 12 years ago." She reached into her flight suit and pulled out a small data drive, wrapped in cloth soft with age. Ethan's real flight data. Not the version that ended up in the official report. "I pulled it myself the night before you made me sign something else." Osborne stared at it like it was something venomous. "You kept evidence. For 12 years. "I kept the truth," Harper said. "Because you took everything else." A young captain stepped out of the shadows near the hangar entrance, tablet in hand. "Sir, I've already forwarded today's diagnostic readouts to the Inspector General's office. Standard procedure, given the anomalies." Osborne's head snapped toward him. "You did what?" "With respect, sir," the captain said, steady, unshaken, "I think this stopped being anyone's call to make quietly the moment a defect that killed a pilot in training almost killed his son 12 years later." The fight went out of Osborne all at once, not surrender exactly, more like exhaustion finally catching up to a man who had spent 12 years holding a lie together and found, at last, that it had gotten heavier than he could carry. "Let her go," he said, hollow, to no one in particular. By the next morning, grainy phone footage of a woman in a gray hoodie walking calmly toward a control tower was already trending under a name nobody official had confirmed yet, Valkyrie. By evening, someone had matched her face to a half-scrubbed service record. The reporter who'd mocked her at the fence that afternoon ran a segment that night calling her the pilot the Air Force tried to forget, and never once mentioned the joke she'd made 24 hours earlier. Harper let it go. Some corrections don't need to be spoken out loud to count. National outlets picked the story up within 48 hours. A journalist who specialized in military procurement fraud left 3 voicemails on the base's public affairs line before Harper finally agreed, reluctantly, to a single recorded statement, brief, factual, none of the drama the cameras clearly wanted from her. She'd spent 12 years disappearing. She wasn't interested in spending the next 12 becoming a headline instead of a person. She stood at a podium 3 days after the rescue anyway, because the public affairs office argued, not unreasonably, that her silence was generating more speculation than a short statement ever would. Bennett stood just off to her left, Sling still supporting his arm, close enough that his presence alone answered half the questions before anyone asked them. "I'm not here to talk about myself," Harper said, her voice carrying clean across the room. "I'm here because 12 years ago, a good man died because of a defect the Air Force and a defense contractor both knew about and both chose not to fix. His name was Captain Ethan Cole. He was the finest wingman I ever flew with, and he deserved better than the lie that followed his death for over a decade. Captain Vance, a reporter near the front called out, "Is it true you were pressured to falsify the original incident report?" "I signed a report I knew wasn't accurate," Harper said, meeting the question without flinching, "under circumstances I'm not prepared to discuss in detail today. That's now with the Inspector General's office, and I intend to cooperate fully." "Why speak up now, after 12 years of silence?" Her eyes found Bennett briefly before returning to the room. "Because 2 days ago, that same defect nearly killed Captain Cole's son. I was done being quiet the moment I realized silence wasn't protecting anyone anymore. It was just delaying the next tragedy." The room went still, the particular stillness that follows a sentence too honest to immediately follow with another question. She took 3 more, answered each with the same clipped, unembellished honesty, and stepped away before the cameras could turn the moment into the spectacle they wanted. "That was harder than flying," Bennett murmured as they walked back toward the hangar. "Different kind of terrifying," Harper agreed. "At least up there, I only had to worry about physics." The investigation moved fast once it started. The captain who had quietly photographed the diagnostic readouts that first afternoon, Marcus Whitlock, Harper learned, over coffee a few weeks later, turned out to be the reason the Inspector General's office had moved as quickly as it did. "I almost didn't send those," he admitted, turning his cup slowly between his hands. "Told myself it wasn't my place. That someone above me would catch it eventually, if it actually mattered." "Someone above you had been actively burying it for 12 years, Harper said. "You were the first person in that chain who decided the truth mattered more than the chain of command." He looked uncomfortable with the credit. "I just took some photos of a screen." "That's usually how it starts," she said. "One person deciding they can't unsee what they've already seen." Whitlock's career moved in the opposite direction from Osborne's after that. Within the year he'd been assigned to a newly formed oversight committee auditing contractor compliance fleet-wide, a committee that existed, in no small part, because of exactly what the two of them had uncovered that afternoon. Subpoenaed records showed the contractor's promised fleet-wide redesign had existed only on paper, a cost-saving decision, quietly buried, that had reduced Ethan Cole's death to a line item in a spreadsheet weighing litigation costs against retrofit expenses. The settlement that followed included a court-mandated retrofit completed under independent oversight, and Ethan Cole's death, 12 years buried under the label of pilot error, was formally reclassified. Osborne was relieved of command within the month. He didn't fight it. There wasn't anything left to fight with. He asked for one meeting before he left. Harper almost said no, then didn't, not for forgiveness, she decided on the drive over, because he hadn't earned that and never would. Maybe she just needed to see, with her own eyes, what was left of a man who'd once held her whole future in his hands and chosen, deliberately, to crush it. "I told myself it was for the good of the program," Osborne said, staring at his hands. "I don't believe that anymore." "You had 12 years to fix it," Harper said. "You chose not to. That's not a story about the greater good, Colonel. That's just a story about a man who was scared of losing something smaller than what he actually lost." He didn't argue. There wasn't anything left to argue. "For what it's worth," he said finally, "you were the best pilot I ever trained." "Goodbye, Colonel," Harper said, and meant it exactly as it sounded, an ending, not a punishment. She drove 2 hours inland the following weekend, to a quiet veterans cemetery she hadn't visited in over a decade. She found Ethan's grave without needing to check the row number. Some things, apparently, the body remembers even when the mind spends 12 years trying not to. "Sorry it took me so long," she said, kneeling in the grass. "I told myself I was protecting people. Really, I was just scared." She set a small metal keychain jet in the grass beside the headstone, the twin of the one still worn smooth in her own pocket, a matching pair he'd given her the day she earned her call sign, half joking that every good wingman needed a piece of the sky to carry on the ground. "Your son's flying now," she said, and a wet laugh escaped her despite herself. "Got your hands on the stick. Same stubborn streak about doing things his own way. You'd be so proud of him, Ethan." I wish you could see it. She stayed a long while, letting 12 years of unspoken grief finally find the place it had always belonged. The retired pilot from the fence line found her on the tarmac a few weeks later, Navy cap in hand, looking almost shy for a man who'd spent 50 years in cockpits far more dangerous than this conversation. Said some things that day, he told her. About you washing out. Didn't know I was repeating a lie somebody built on purpose. You didn't know, Harper said. Most people didn't. Doesn't make it right. He turned the cap over once in his hands. I was a wingman once too. Lost my own flight partner in an accident that got written up wrong. Same as yours. I never said anything either. Told myself it was ancient history by the time it would have mattered. Why tell me now? Because watching you finally say something after 12 years made me realize I've been carrying my own silence for almost 40. He shook his head slowly. Might be too late to change anything for him. Might still change something for somebody else. Harper reached out and squeezed his shoulder, a gesture that felt more natural than she expected. It's never actually too late to tell the truth, she said. It's just harder the longer you wait. He nodded, throat working, and didn't trust himself to say anything else for a moment. He became a regular at her Thursday yoga class after that, of all things, showing up in sweatpants and the same navy cap, claiming his knees needed the stretching. Harper never called him out on the real reason he came. She didn't need to. He'd taken her advice, in the end, reached out quietly to the family of the wingman he'd lost decades earlier, finally sharing details he'd carried silently for almost 40 years. It hadn't fixed anything that couldn't be fixed after so much time, he told her afterward. But it had felt like setting down a weight he hadn't realized he was still carrying. That same spring, the base commander approached Harper with a proposal she hadn't expected, a formal memorial for Ethan Cole, to be installed in the main hangar where his name could finally stand as more than a footnote in a story that had spent 12 years getting told wrong. Harper worked with Bennett to choose the wording, sitting at her kitchen table for 3 evenings running, sifting through old photographs and half-remembered stories, trying to fit 12 years of grief and silence onto a small brass plaque without losing what actually mattered. He wouldn't want anything dramatic, Bennett said, studying a draft. He was never the type to make a big deal out of himself. No, Harper agreed. He'd probably tell us to skip the ceremony and go get lunch instead. They settled, eventually, on something simple, Ethan Cole's name, his call sign, the dates of his service, and a single line beneath it all, he flew with courage. He was remembered with truth. Harper suggested, almost as an afterthought, that Bennett be the one to unveil it rather than any visiting official. He went quiet at the suggestion, then nodded, understanding without needing further explanation that this particular honor belonged to family, not to an institution that had spent 12 years failing to grant his father the dignity he deserved. The unveiling was small, deliberately so, a handful of squadron members who'd served alongside Ethan, Bennett's mother standing quietly beside her son with tears she made no effort to hide, and Harper standing slightly apart from the group, the way she always seemed to, even now. Bennett's mother found her afterward, taking both of Harper's hands in her own. He told me about you, years ago, she said. Said if anything ever happened to him, you'd make sure people knew the truth eventually. Her voice caught. He was right to trust you. I wanted you to know that. Harper didn't trust her own voice enough to answer right away. She simply nodded, throat tight, and let the moment hold whatever weight it needed to hold. Command offered her full reinstatement, with honors, a public ceremony, cameras, the whole apparatus of institutional redemption rolled out like a red carpet for a mistake they'd finally decided to admit. Harper said yes to the reinstatement. She said no to the ceremony. I don't need a stage, she told the base commander, the last time he raised it. I needed 12 years of my life back, and nobody can give me those. A ceremony doesn't fix that. It just photographs it. He didn't argue after that either. Bennett found her on the tarmac a few days later, arms still in a sling, watching the runway stretch toward the horizon. They offered me a reassignment, he said. Fresh start, different base. Are you taking it? No. I want to stay. Finish training. Fly the way my dad would have wanted. He glanced at her, something hopeful breaking through the exhaustion in his face. I'll need an instructor. Harper felt something loosen in her chest, warm and unexpected. Someone's got to make sure the next generation doesn't inherit any more lies. 6 months later, the coastal town Harper had once disappeared into barely recognized her anymore, though she'd never actually left it. She still taught 2 yoga classes a week, mostly out of loyalty to the women who'd brought her banana bread on Thursdays without ever asking a single question about her past. 3 mornings a week now, she drove out to the base before sunrise, boots on the tarmac before the sun cleared the water, training the newest generation of pilots the way she'd once been trained herself. Bennett was one of them, steadier now, sharper, flying his father's call sign forward with a quiet pride Harper recognized in her own reflection some mornings. On a crisp spring day, she watched him take his first solo flight since the crash, hands clasped behind her back in a stance that mirrored, without her quite realizing it, the exact posture Ethan used to hold whenever he supervised a nervous student's first solo. The jet climbed clean and confident into a pale morning sky. Valkyrie, Bennett's voice crackled over the radio, steadier now than it had been on that terrible afternoon months before. How's that look from down there? Harper allowed herself a rare, unguarded smile. Looks like your father's son, she said. Take her home clean, Lieutenant. Copy that. She watched him bring the jet down in a landing so smooth it barely registered as a bump on the runway, and felt something settle inside her chest that had been unsettled for 12 straight years. Not closure, exactly. Something steadier than that. Something closer to peace. Her hand found the keychain in her pocket, worn smooth now, familiar under her thumb the way it had been for over a decade. It didn't carry the same weight anymore, the weight of something buried and grieved and hidden. Now it just felt like a beginning. Somewhere behind her, a new group of young pilots filed out of the briefing room, laughing, nervous, alive with the particular electricity of people about to learn something that would change them. Harper Vance turned from the sunset and walked toward them, because the sky had never stopped knowing her name. It had just been waiting for her to remember it herself.